Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and today's video we'll be taking a look at agility DPS. Last time we looked at caster DPS, and a lot of you guys want to see agility DPS. I was thinking of making this just a PvP video to take a look at how these classes are PvP wise, and we are technically able to test them at 120 for PvP. We can't queue dungeons, we can't really go out and do world quests, so we can't really experience how these classes are supposed to play for PvE, but I will take a note towards every single spec in terms of PvE, whether it be raids or whether it be Mythic Plus, and just kind of try to bring this video so it's more generalized about what the class is about rather than only PvP or PvE. As a lot of you guys on live streams have asked for me to take a look at them and explain these classes, what I think about them in terms of raids as well as Mythic Pluses. As always, we're taking a look at classes in the early beta, but we're getting close to the game release, but it's still technically beta. There's a lot of changes happening every single day, and I just want to showcase you guys what some of these classes are like, in case you want to play new alts, new mains, and you're trying to maybe figure out if your main that you've been playing for the longest time might be a perfect time for you to switch off and find a brand new character. Maybe you might not agree with how Blizzard is taking this class in a certain direction. I will try to be as fair with every single class, giving you positives and negatives and trying not to be too negative or too positive, as equal as possible. But I do want to give you guys as clear of an image of what is going on with all these classes and specs in BFA. Hunters are so fun, and survival spec and marksman spec are the ones I'm really interested about. Beast Mastery is the one I did not play, but trust me when I say this, everybody and the mother is playing Beast Mastery, whether it's duels, BGs, or arenas, as it is the most popular spec right now. But the ones I'm very focused about when it comes to Hunter will be Survival and Marksman. Beast Mastery being a good spec already puts this spec ahead of some of the others towards the top. Maybe not the very top, but pretty up there. I have to compare. But Survival, the playstyle change, and the Marksman playstyle change are very important for me. Survival has always been this spec that's interesting. You know, it's a melee hunter, but you know what? When you're putting abilities together on Legion, I felt like it was still, no matter how much you tried it, it was very clunky. It did not play like everybody else. It was really just compared to Demon Hunters. Demon Hunters is kind of like where Blizzard is taking the game. Yes, you're gonna have prunes, but you have abilities that are more straightforward, impactful, and have more than one use. For example, if you use I-Beam, you can have it as a single target or AoE, like multiple use abilities. You're getting a very similar like design theory with Survival Hunter. So compared to the other classes that are doing well on BFA, Survival is gonna feel better to some extent. If you're somebody who enjoyed the specific playstyle that I had, the very unique playstyle, then you are going to be losing it, but it's going to be, I guess, more available to the populace. What I thought was really well done about Survival, though, and what I really liked is that balance between range, melee type of caster, slash melee, not really, I never consider hunters a caster, but so many people consider them casters, casting physical damage at enemies. I felt like casters are something that can be kicked. I'd rather look to them as range physical damage. But that, I guess, semblance and the balance between melee and range, it's so nice, as it's not a hybrid. You are mostly a melee class. You're supposed to get in there and bash enemy in the face, but if you need to get back, like in BGs, to safety, spread some dots, throw some grenades, throw your pet in there, have them bite a few guys in the ankles, then get the damage going, get the focus going with your pet command, harpoon in there, come in, bam, just burst them down as much as you can, disengage out of there. It's awesome for that. So the spec is very versatile in that round. Lots of awesome new talents, and the spec is so new, and it's just, I feel like it's so new, it's hard to judge it. So far, it doesn't really have the burstiest playstyle, it's more rampy, but the damage is definitely there. I felt so much fun just playing this spec, and I love the variety, versatility, and the balance between melee and range, how you still are a melee, but if you do want to get some range to you, as other hunters have, you can, I guess, take on that form. With Marksman Hunter, you end up basically playing a sniper in the back. Still a very cool playstyle. As a marksman, you lost a lot of CC in terms of your dedicated stun, which Summit Survival has now, by the way. Awesome to have a dedicated stun, and I do end up missing it a little bit for Marksman. But as Marksman, you're like a Warlock in the back, casting big old Chaos Bolts, except you're casting aim shots with a big burst of damage. Your damage comes in waves. It'll be a big burst of wave and then kind of slow down. Big burst of wave and kind of slow down, where you are regenerating your focus and mostly just pew-pewing enemies from the back. It is really cool playstyle where you're sitting at the back of the line with the casters, probably even further back, at the very back of your group, just barraging them with arrows, really focusing down singular targets. Very, very cool, very unique playstyle in the dynamic of a battleground, and I feel like the spec is going to end up having a very bursty, but not a very sustained playstyle for PvP, which is completely fine. The spec can have an execute mechanic, or just if you want to punch the hole into through the armor, really just chuck down a good amount of health off the top. You'll be the class that will be basically getting the bursty opener every single time. So I really like what the survival and marksmen have to bring into the team. Very, very cool. And of course, for raids, hunters have always been a staple of PvE. Mostly range hunter specs, so for survival, it'll be interesting where they will end up. But usually most groups bring at least one hunter because their ability of doing damage while moving around, where some casters have to stop casting just to move around out of mechanics or move mechanics out of the group. Hunters always going to have that position to be able to do certain mechanics that other range classes just never can do. So Hunters always going to have a secured spot within PvE. With survival, we'll have to see where it goes for the spec in the future. Rogues are in such a good spot, it is not even funny, and it's not because I'm biased. Well, it is because I'm biased. I've been playing Rogue for so long, but honestly, a lot of you guys might want to start leveling Rogues if you haven't played one before. They are basically more or less the same, except the weaker spec for PvE and PvP, Outlaw, now deals a fair chunk of damage compared to the other specs, while the other two stayed more or less the same, making all three specs a viable option for how you want to play. You either can play Assassination Rogue, Master of Poisons and Bleeds, a very heavy on dodge, great spread pressure, and insane amounts of burst. You can play Outlaw, a very wild card of a spec with a very interesting niche abilities of, let's say, in PvP, for example, Gouge, Blind on a shorter cooldown, Grapple Hook out of the situations, put a fair amount of healing from your concoction, maybe making 2 of those Crimson Vials as well for PvP to be able to just have a lot of self-heal capability, very piratey with range stuns and overall very good strong sustained damage, whether you use Roll the Bones or not, with Roll the Bones not impeding your playstyle. And of course we have Subtlety, the master of CC, but not really master of all types of damage. And one thing on Subtlety, you can either have sustained damage or burst damage, whether you decide just to build yourself one way or the other. That's really the only difference. Past that, all the specs feel great. Rogues are going to be in such a good spot, and it just feels so great for PvE or PvP. For PvP, however, they will feel a little bit squishy, and I guess to some extent for PvE. The only thing that is heavily nerfed for Rogues is Feint and the use of it. Usually it combos really well for PvP with a talent Elusiveness, where Elusiveness allows Feint to reduce single target damage to us by 30%. Feint having a 15-second cooldown for PvE purposes will make Rogues a little bit squishier, but I feel like everybody who played Rogue in the past, or anybody who can learn how to play Rogue, will learn pretty quickly that, hey, you have plenty of defensives. You still have Vanish, still have Cloak, still have Evasion or Parry if you're Outlaw, still have a variety of CC. I mean, I'm making the specs seem overpowered, but I will say Rogue's in a very good spot. Like, it's actually kind of ridiculous, and I'm almost expecting some kind of nerfs on damage alone or something of that sort. But Rogue's in a great spot where they want to have a 6-second silence as Assassination, 30-second CD reduction on Blind, or insane amounts of back-to-back CC as Subtlety. Rogues is shaping up to be a very, very strong class with actually a fair amount of healing. Surprise, surprise, for a class that usually is not a hybrid. Overall, I think they're going to be great for PvP as well as BGs. And PvE, I feel like Outlaw is the one that's kind of taken the lead right now, but in the past, Subtlety and Assassination sometimes need a little bit of a boost with gear or stats in order to get to a viable option. So I feel like in the future, both of those specs will start to be coming out on top ahead of Outlaw. Monk is a very interesting class, as it's a class that had a very similar playstyle to Subtlety, and that's actually what a lot of classes had for Legion for the longest time, a very hit and run playstyle. Like, you would burst somebody down, right, open up an enemy, lock them down when stuns and crowd control, burst down all of them, and then run away and wait for your cooldowns to come back, usually waiting about a minute. That type of burst playstyle of hit and run over and over and over gets pretty boring to watch in duels, as well as other PvE, PvP situations for a while. Monks have been a very, very strong class. And for PvP, they're having so many changes that a lot of people are finding them not that great. I will be in the minority when I say I actually kind of like the new monks. They are more sustained based rather than, you know, hit and run, burst, and kind of try to run away. But they're also very, very squishy. They reduced a lot of the crowd control, but they gave you a lot more talents as well as honor talents now that are viable for PvP purposes as well as PvE. I feel like the spec is going through a lot of changes, but for PvP in particular, they are losing the ability to paralyze the enemy every 15 seconds down to a 45-second cooldown. Your AoE stun, your leg sweep is now a 3-second stun because they're nerfing all AoE stuns, and then taking out the baseline stun or even an untalented stun for Fist of Fury. So this spec doesn't have a lot of CC, but what do you get instead of that? You get a lot of good strong sustained damage. You still have a lot of strong mobility, and I feel like defensive wise you are even better on that round as well. Karma within brand new talent where it allows Karma to absorb even more damage to be 100% of your health. If somebody bursts you down, you can redirect 100% of your health within 6 seconds to a whole another enemy or back at the enemy, so timing that ability will be perfect. You still have Touch of Death, which offers you a very, very bursty playstyle, still a variety of talents allowing you to play more than one way, and the way I've been playing has been a very sustaining playstyle, and seeing monks do sustained damage to just keep hitting the enemy over and over and over, as long as you have defensives or can run away from the counter burst, then I feel like it makes the spec very, very fun. So the spec is very squishy. It has a lot of this risk-reward aspect to it for PvP, a lot better sustained damage, which I absolutely like, but also you're very squishy, which makes me want to play it a lot more. If you're not perfect with your talents, if you're not rotating your cooldowns properly, if you're just throwing out your karma and not even thinking about it, you can put yourself in a bad situation. But a well-placed karma, a well-timed trinket, or a well-timed defensive can keep you afloat and running with the damage. They can just keep supplementing and keep pushing and pushing and pushing. In terms of PvE, monks are going to be necessary no matter what you do. They're going to be a staple of PvE. Monks, all 3 specs, carry a debuff when they deal damage to the enemy that makes them take 5% more physical damage from any target. So imagine a raid group without a monk is basically a raid group that is naked and losing out on 5% extra physical damage. Or a Mythic Plus group, depending on the comp, will want at least maybe a healer monk, a tank monk, or at least a DPS monk. And I feel like monks, no matter what damage they do, good or bad, because of this debuff, will be a necessity when it comes to groups. As long as you're the best monk that your guild can find, you'll at least have at least a guaranteed spot in a raid group. Demon Hunters are very, very similar to monks in terms of being squishy, mobile, and pretty bursty. But I feel like Demon Hunters have a little bit more CC than a monk, so if you're somebody who's been playing monk, maybe Demon Hunter might be a class you might want to look into as avenues. Though Demon Hunters are not quite as sustaining on damage, their damage definitely evolved and got a lot better when it comes to BFA. I feel like Legion and BFA are going to be both expansions where Demon Hunter is going to overtake basically how majority of the classes are going to be, I guess, represented by Blizzard. BFA and Legion, Demon Hunter is a class as a staple of what kind of where Blizzard wants to take a lot of those classes. Yes, it does seem like it's a prune, but a lot of the abilities are very core and very straightforward, and some of them have more than one use. For example, I-Beam being a very, very strong one, where it's an ability that's a single target plus an AoE all in the same field, becoming a very, very powerful cooldown no matter the situation. With them adjusting how a lot of these abilities function, they made Demon Hunters have a lot of strong cooldowns, and some cooldowns that you thought were actually defensives but now are hyper offensive. Demon Hunters, for example, I-Beam, very, very strong. Your Fel Barrage still very, very strong. And Rain from Above is no longer just a defensive to run away from enemies' debuffs, but you can actually use it for decent damage, which is hilarious. Chaos Strike deals a lot better damage now, so when it comes to sustained damage, as long as you have the resources for it, in terms of Fury, which I feel like they made it easier to manage. I very much like the playstyle, and I'm again in the minority here, where Demon Hunters generate Fury with their auto attacks, and I think something about the RNG of that they fixed, where I actually have a fair amount of Fury at all times. They changed up the momentum playstyle where Demon Hunters use Fel Rush in order to deal a little bit more damage, while adding an ability where you use the retreat, the demonic retreat, to gain Fury over time. So you can kind of use those mobility abilities into your offensive playstyle, allowing a really interesting mix between offensiveness and mobility in order to kind of supplement and play all together in terms of trying to deal as much damage as humanly possible. Overall, making the spec very, very interesting. Very, very squishy spec though, which I think is a good thing. Squishiness about the class has never really stopped me. I mean, I'm playing a rogue to this day, and rogues I would say are fairly squishy. But I like that glass cannon capability. I really like what they did with mages being very, very glass cannony. Like, you are a cannon that punches through the armor, but you're glass, you're paper, you're gonna get shredded. Similar thing for a Demon Hunter. Without a trinket, without a time blur, without a time defensive, a lot like monks, I can go down very, very quickly. But I felt like I had a little bit extra CC to myself, and the fun playstyle of mobility involvement into my damage and rotation was very, very cool. Instead of using my mobility always as a defensive way or as a way to kind of catch up to the enemy, mobility is part of my playstyle in terms of damage. So that's been very, very fun. In terms of PvE, Just like monks, demon hunters are going to be a necessity, no matter what you do for raids or mythic pluses, as they bring also a debuff. When demon hunters deal damage to an enemy, that enemy takes 5% more magical damage. This is going to be important and necessary in every single raid team, and this is going to be necessary in some mythic plus combinations. So if you're somebody who wants to play a class that's going to have a secured need to be added to a group for PvE, Demon Hunters is always going to have that, as long as you're the best Demon Hunter that you can be, or at least if you're the least known one in your guild raid group. Feral is a very interesting class, as it fulfills almost like a fourth spec of rogues that I always wanted Assassination to be. For the longest time, I wanted Assassination to be a Affliction Warlock with daggers, basically. That's been my personal fantasy, class fantasy about Assass. So, Ferals are all about them bleeds. That's basically what they are all about. I really like it though. Ferals are a very, very interesting class and very mobile class. Very just free-flowing class with a lot of capability for a bit of magical damage if you're talented to Moonfire, a little bit of bleeds all over the place, and ability to spread them around everywhere like AIDS. Ferals are just so fun to play. I absolutely enjoyed it. It's another one of those cases where I'm playing Boomkin and I'm like, wow, the playstyle is so perfect for PvP, but it's a class that I was just gonna write off because it didn't get that many changes for BFA. Same thing with Feral. It's another class I was gonna completely write off because it didn't get that many changes for BFA. Some changes are good, but sometimes more of the same, more of the good old, I guess, is more of the good old. Ferals are great. They are more bleed focused, unless you're going for Incarnation. And I'll be honest, I was never a huge fan of Incarnation. For the longest time, I was not really keen on, hey, let me pop one button that all of my burst lasts for a long while, and that's really where all my damage comes from. I like when more of my damage comes from other avenues, like abilities that my class has. More sustained damage being a majority of my damage rather than burst damage. You know what I mean? It's not that fun when you just have one big button and feel like, wow, oh my god, and then all of a sudden, as soon as that's down, it's like, well, I guess I have to wait until that's back up, until I feel godly again. So I always avoided Incarnation whenever I could. But I like the current bleed playstyle that I have right now. Even with the current playstyle, I can actually get some decent burst on Legion in terms of shred burst damage. Like, you can actually just chunk a certain amount of health out of the enemy. Current Feral and BFA, very sustained, very good on bleeds. Rip, the stronger bleed. Rake, the second stronger bleed. Moonfire, if you spread it on a bunch of enemies, it deals decent damage. You can just melt multiple people at the same time, and it feels so cool. Combine that with the power shifting capability of a Feral Druid for PvP, allowing you to get out of so many bad situations, and healing actually being good. So Restoration Affinity is actually worth grabbing. I feel like I was just always uncatchable. I feel like I could always just squeeze out of a bad situation anytime I wanted. So a very, very interesting mechanic of self-healing, dot damage, very, very strong dot damage. So literally feels like Affliction Warlock with daggers, but I guess with fangs at this point. Very, very fun playstyle. In terms of PvE and Mythic Pluses, I'm not sure how Ferals are going to do though, because you're talking about damage over time, which can be very, very strong, but I feel like for the longest time, I've seen Ferals do damage with shreds and big bites. That might come back with certain Azeroth bonuses, and I think going for more versatility heavy playstyle with haste maybe for more energy, that haste also supplementing the tick rate of your bleeds, I think that might end up playing for a better playstyle. What I end up doing is doing a little bit of crit, a little bit of mostly mastery, but then a little bit of haste for the dot tick. So maybe haste heavy might end up working better for Feral, more energy regen, plus more ticks of your dots for the duration that you are giving them. So it might be very, very interesting, but it looks like a very, very interesting playstyle and a very interesting spec. Very much like what they did in terms of stats for it. I feel like it adds a lot more flexibility of how you can approach the situation. Overall, I actually very much enjoyed Feral for PvP, and I feel for PvE, that whole playstyle of just bleeding things down is actually very, very fun and very enjoyable. For the longest time, I didn't really like Feral because I felt like it was a subtlety combined with assassination, but, you know, I might as well just play Rogue, one spec or the other if I really want to get the full experience. But Feral ended up feeling so good for PvP, I actually might end up playing it in BFA. And then finally, we have the Enhancement Shaman. I should mention off the bat that Shamans and Shadow Priests are going to go through changes in patch 8.1. For some people, this is enough of a red flag to say, okay, well, I want to play a complete specialization once the game comes out. So, completely understandable for some of you if you want to play a complete spec and if Shamans might not fulfill that for you. Shaman is something that I tried for a bit here and there, but I felt like just to make sure that I have as fair of an assessment of the spec, I had to do a couple battlegrounds. Not just on couple on stream, but more off stream. Try different builds, try different Azeroth bonuses. Now, I think I'm kind of starting to set the tone here. A lot of these other specs that I'm talking about, I had to play them once to figure out what I think about them. With Shaman, I forced myself to play them multiple times just to make sure I'm as fair as I can. So here it goes. The specialization has good, strong, sustained damage in terms of dealing damage at your enemy. As long as you can stay in melee, as long as you can build your Maelstrom and spend it with Storm Strikes and your Flame Tongues, which feels like Storm Strike and Flame Tongue are more equal in terms of damage. So I think going for Flame Tongues or Storm Strikes, or going for procs of Storm Strikes and then Flame Tongues afterwards, it doesn't feel like it has, you know, a big kick with Storm Strike and then very, very little kick with Flame Tongue. It feels like no matter which one you press, you're still dealing good damage. So consistency is good for the spec. One bad thing that I can think about the spec is it's not as mobile as I hoped it would be, which is very, very bad for battlegrounds because you just get swarmed by so many people. On top of it, you're not all that tanky. You are pretty squishy. For a class that has a lot of sustained damage, you want to kind of stay in the melee a lot. You want to stay on the enemy for a while. But for this class, as squishy as it is, not that much mobile, squishiness made me think, okay, maybe it's a hit and run playstyle, kind of like a monk or a demon hunter or any one of these other classes. Just come in, do a bunch of damage, and back out. You don't have the mobility to back out of a situation. You don't really have strong enough defenses to, you know, stay in the situation for too long. You're not quite a paladin, not quite a warrior, not even quite a death knight. A lot of these other classes can stay in there for quite a while. As a shaman, you kind of just get melted, and there's been moments where you even pop wall, and it just get completely melted. Shamans are really good at healing though. When it comes to 1v1 duels, where you're not in the battleground, when you're trying to self-heal yourself, or even heal others, using abilities like your Earth Shield and popping heals on a friendly that has the Earth Shield, whether it's you or a friendly ally, you actually can do a fair amount of side healing. That means you are spending global cooldowns to heal them, so it's not spending global cooldowns to deal damage, but if you're fine sacrificing some damage for a bad situation, you can actually get a fair amount of healing. So Shamans end up feeling really good when it comes to one-on-one duels, or maybe 2v2s where they need some off healing, or 3s off healing on the side. I feel like a lot of people will start watching out for Shamans and their healing, and watching out who is the Earth Shield on, as that Earth Shield becomes a lot more powerful, not just for rest of Shamans, but for just about every other rest Shaman spec. But Shamans, they do come in with a lot of GCDs. I did mention earlier that you will spend GCDs healing. Shamans have a lot of abilities that are on GCD, in terms of, let's say, getting your damage ramped up. And with a sustained damage playstyle, just to come in and get, let's say, Bloodlust, let's get the Wolves, let's me get the, you know, I'd say you go in first and spend the global to build up your Maelstrom, then you get the Wolves, then you get the Bloodlust, then you get the Earth and Spike, then you get the Storm Strike, then you get the other ability, another ability, another. None of these abilities really feel bursty, so it feels like with the build up for your burst, with so many abilities, you gotta just pop off 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Just getting all these abilities you used to just use in all at once in a single GCD back in Legion. It just takes a while for it to ramp up, and then you have sustained damage rather than very high burst damage, which makes the spec feel very, very slow. So in Battlegrounds, for example, I am coming out, I'm like, cool down, cool down, cool down. Okay, I'm dying. Somebody help me. So it felt like unless I have a healer pocket healing me the whole time, it just won't feel that great. Another thing that I can say about the spec, it's a very cool spec in terms of its playstyle, in terms of different talents that you have. I like what Blizzard is going for. They're talking about like enhancement, like you enhance your weapons, you enhance your abilities, and I can kind of see a little bit of that coming back with the game. Some of the cool talents are like Lightning Shield, for example, coming back. You enhance the area around you. You have a shield around you. You can enhance your weapon to be, you know, a little bit more powerful. It's a very much fun playstyle with enhancing weapons, buffing your weapons, adding some kind of magical imbuements to them in terms of the fight. So in terms of actual like fantasy and playstyle, it actually feels kind of cool. And I think it would be pretty neat in order to play all that up, as the playstyle is more or less the same for PvP and PvE, with I guess the class fantasy that comes with it. But the spec is a little bit on the weaker side, regardless in terms of PvP for me. For PvE, however, nice sustaining playstyle is actually not terrible. You do lose your AoE stun being, you know, a full stun, as all AoE stuns have got nerfed. But you are bringing a little bit more to the team when it comes to in PvE. You have a great defensive if you want to talent into it with Wall, combine that with Ghost Wolf, where the longer you are in wolf form, the more defensive you can get. So in certain raid environments or mythic pluses where you get one shot, I feel like enhancement is going to be a a little bit more competitive. You also bring in very much support role of, you know, Tremor Totem to get yourself out of CC. You have slows, you have range kicks, purges, so you play in a very support role for both PvE and PvP. But the damage and how long it takes to set it up, and not all talents being all that viable right now. For example, I ran a BG on stream, and I used an ability of Sundering 4 times, and I had so many Storm Strikes, so many abilities, so many Lightning Bolts, all these abilities getting fired left and right at enemy every time I'm alive. I used Sundering only 4 times, and that ability ended up dealing the most amount of damage out of everything that I've spent. So I feel like maybe there'll be some tuning done or necessary for in terms of the DPS, the damage output. I feel like there needs to be some burstiness about the spec. Some people even suggested maybe make an ability like Storm Strike instead of all physical nature, so it goes through all types of armor, so that could be like that bursty ability, bursty element to it, but I don't really know. I definitely think that there is something incomplete, not completely 100% perfect. I would say Shamans, or both specs of them, are really like 90% complete. There's like that 10% that Blizzard hasn't filled quite in, and I feel like that might have been with the artifact weapons. I feel like the artifact weapons and the effects themselves, if they were to be added now to the current Shamans, they would feel actually a little bit closer to like a finalized spec. Because, like for example, the burstiness and the lack thereof of Enhancement Shaman for PvP or PvE came from your artifact weapon, which forced those Windfear procs. So stuff like that, if that maybe could come back as a baseline ability, that might make it feel a little bit better. I feel like it's just they're so close to getting it right, but not quite there, and I am kind of starting to see what developers are talking about when they're saying they're going to work on both of these classes, Shadow Priest as well as Shamans, in 8.1. I'm really hoping that Enhancement is going to be one of the specs that will have enough changes in order to make it perfect, but some people are pretty content and happy with it as they are. So there are some Shaman mains that are saying it's fine as it is. I've played it, and it did not click with me at all, but that has been my opinion completely. Alright, so we take a look at all the different classes that are agility. So let's take a look at the ranking. In my ranking, I would put in the top tier Rogue, Hunters, and Ferals. Hunters are there mostly because Beast Mastery is a solid spec, so you can always have a fallback to it. But I like the challenges and changes to Survival and Marksman. I very like what Blizzard is doing, and the fact that they are making these changes, trying to give you different playstyles. Overall, I felt like it was a great spec, and I felt like it impressed me for PvE or PvP, and makes me want to level a Hunter as soon as possible. Rogues, of course, are strong, really strong right now. If the weakest spec out of all three, Outlaw, is in a fair position, like a very strong position right now, then I feel like all the other specs are just going to be there too. And I feel like for Rogues in PvP and PvE, having great defensives of Cloak, Evasion, and Feint, Vanish, as well as CC for PvP, a plethora of variety of CC, has never made him bad, ever. Ferals also found the playstyle absolutely impeccable. I love the bleed playstyle. I feel like it has a lot of variety. It's definitely one of the specs where haste, versatility, crit, and mastery all can play a role, and I feel like they can shape them no matter the situation is, Mythic Plus dungeons, raids, or PvP. Absolutely love them. Slightly lower on them, between the top tier and mid tier, I found Demon Hunters kind of fun. I wouldn't quite put them at the top, but I also don't want to put them at mid tier for any reason whatsoever. I actually would want to put Monks there too, but they're a whole nother topic. I found Demon Hunters a blast to play. I mean, they are squishy, yes, but they're so much fun. It's hard to decline that, you know, I mean, you have a class with so many backflips and all these cool looking abilities, the chaos strikes, and the mobility combined with the damage is like part of your key core concept. And of course, there's nice beefy metamorphosis on top of that. I really like how Blizzard kind of added a little bit more oomph towards the cooldowns, defensive, or I guess what considered to be offensive cooldowns, like Rain from Above becoming this like one and all kind of cooldown. I very much like what they're doing with it and the direction that they're going. I feel like it's cool to watch Demon Hunter shape, you know, in the game after we stop fighting all the demons. Then Monks go in the mid tier, although I honestly would want to put them in the top tier, or at least where the Demon Hunters are, because they're just so much fun. I actually like the new playstyle, but I know that I'm going to be in the minority. There's a lot of people that play in Monks because of its hit and run playstyle, so Blizzard changing that is definitely going to make a lot of people unhappy. So just to be fair with the spec, I think I will put him in the mid tier for now, but honestly they're very much like a Demon Hunter. Besides Demon Hunter having mobility as almost part of your damage rotation, Monks have the mobility as a utility. You want to roll anywhere, you want to drag and kick out of there, you want to teleport out, you can, so you can have a little bit more variety of mobility and a little more free use of it, I guess, to some extent. Also, I love the monk aesthetic of punches and kicks and having good strong sustained damage. I honestly would put it where the demon hunters are, but to be fair to the rest of the monk community, I think I will have to put it in mid tier because they're losing a crucial component of what made them really good in Legion, and that is all the crowd control. And then I would put enhancement and the mid tier to lower tier. I don't want to put it completely in the lower tier. I don't want to put it in the lowest or anything. Lower tier doesn't really stand for lowest. There's really no terrible spec, but compared to other agilities, it is definitely there. It is not the worst, as it has good damage. Like Shaman does shine in 1v1 duels, great healing, great sustain, as long as you don't have a bunch of enemies dogpiling on you. In 2v2 arenas and in 3v3 arenas, you can only have so many people attacking you at the same time, maximum 2. So you can, with a good healer, you can really maintain yourself. But when it comes to BGs, like even if I'm popping wall, everybody just sits on me and just doesn't let me breathe at all. It just makes the spec feel a little underwhelming. I feel like there's some of the changes, maybe the damage is just not there, but it feels like a specialization that is a glass cannon E. Like you're very, very squishy, but you should be able to dish out a punishment back at the enemy. At least I would hope, but I just don't really know what Blizzard is trying to do with it right now. I don't really know which direction they want it to go currently. I do know that there's going to be changes in 8.1, so that is going to be a chance for me to go back on Shaman and take a look at what they're all about by then. I feel like they'll be completely fine for PvE as a class, but it's just the damage on their own, kind of the slow aspect of building up your damage, the GCD, like tripping on GCDs. It just doesn't feel quite as good, at least currently for me. But then again, it's just my opinion. There are a lot of people that are finding Shaman completely fine. They're saying it's fine, it's okay, it's fine. But I feel like to describe a spec, I want it to be good, rather than fine. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with my listing or do you don't? I try to give as many equal and fair representations for every single class that is agility. I am going to be making a video couple days from now. I want to check out all the strength classes. I want to check out warriors in detail. I want to check out death knights in details and paladin, as there's only so many strength classes out there, and maybe you haven't to help you guys figure out which strength class, mostly from the DPS aspect, do you want to play for BFA. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'd like to hear your guys' listing. How would you rank all these classes in the top tier, mid tier, lower tier kind of ranking? Which ones do you think are going to be good? And if you're going to be playing any of these classes once BFA comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in another video.